we lose two of our greatest leaders in this week's Torah portion, Aaron, Aharon, and his sister Miriam. When Aharon dies, we're told that the entire Jewish people cried for 30 days. How appropriate. Aharon was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, always putting the needs of the nation before his own. He would defer to his younger brother Moshe, as the leader. And he would always make sure to stop fights. He'd run after his fellow man if two people were in a fight, and he'd get in the middle, and he'd make sure to make peace. So of course they cried. But strangely, earlier in the Torah portion, when Miriam dies, all we're told is that she died and she was buried. No mention of any crying, because apparently, astoundingly, the Jewish people didn't cry when she died. How is that possible? Think about her resume. Think about all the things she did for the Jewish people, for those very Jews in the desert. When she was a little girl, her father Amram was the leader of the Jewish people. And he separated from his wife, Miriam's mother, Yocheved, because they were worried that they would have a baby boy and that boy would be thrown into the Nile because of Pharaoh's decree to kill all the Jewish baby boys. Miriam confronted her father as a little girl, and she said, "Dad, you're worse than Pharaoh. Pharaoh's decree only concerns Jewish baby boys. By separating from Mom, you're decreeing against boys and girls." He smiled, he kissed her, he said, "You're right." And he got back together with his wife in a huge public wedding. And all of the other Jewish men who had followed their leader and separated from their wives, they now followed suit again. They got back together with their wives. So little Miriam, as a child, was responsible not just for the subsequent birth of her younger brother, the great Moshe, but for countless other, thousands of other Jewish babies. And further, Miriam and Yocheved were the Jewish midwives. And rather than buckling to Pharaoh's pressure and obeying the decree, they refused to kill the Jewish baby boys. And instead, they delivered them and made sure they were healthy. And further, during the terrible, backbreaking slavery, Miriam would go to the Jewish women and beautify them, make sure they were attractive, so as to excite and entice their husbands to be intimate with them, leading to the birth of even more Jewish babies. And then later, at the splitting of the sea, when it came back together and destroyed the Egyptian army, and the Jews were finally fully free, who was there, front and center, leading the women in song and prayer and dance? Miriam. And so many times in the desert, when the men sinned, the women didn't. The women didn't participate in the sin of the golden calf. Even at the sin of the spies, the women cried, but unlike the men, they didn't say, "Let's go back to Egypt." Who was it that gave the women that strength? Who influenced them? Who inspired them on a daily basis? Miriam. And yet they didn't cry. And because they didn't cry tears, they lost the merit of the miraculous well that had followed the Jews and provided water for 40 years in Miriam's merit. By not crying, the Jews exhibited a certain level of tone deafness. And the Talmud warns us, if the Jews are suffering, if tragedy strikes, and your Jewish brethren are having difficulty, and you don't sympathize, you don't commiserate, you lock yourself in your home and you say, "I'm going to eat and I'm going to drink and I'm going to be merry," and that's their problem. The very walls and stones of your house will testify against you as to your cruelty. When your Jewish brethren are in difficulty, when tragedy strikes, you've got to sympathize. And make no mistake, your Jewish brethren, our Jewish brethren, are suffering now. Suffering grievously because tragedy has struck. As we scour the internet and the airwaves for any news, any crumb of information about the whereabouts, about the health of those 3 innocent Jewish boys who were kidnapped by those monsters in Israel, we have to sympathize with the plight of those boys and their families. Those boys weren't kidnapped because they're religious Jews. They were kidnapped because they're Jews. So all of us, every Jew of every possible level of observance, we each have to ask ourselves, what can I do? How can I sympathize? How can I show that I am part of this difficulty? I feel it. I feel the pain of those boys and their families. What can I do? Some more prayer, some more charity, some more good deeds, some more Torah study. What can I do to rattle the gates of heaven to help bring back our boys?